Hi, I'm Marcellino. I'm an Australian composer and the mentor on this project. This is a fantastic project working with three young composers to work towards this shared vision, crossing the boundaries of two cultures, sharing a common vision to work in music. The brief to write for a community orchestra brings with it its own challenges. It's different to writing for a professional organisation, so the technical limitations are there, but that isn't a restriction on artistic limitations, because the artistic vision can be as strong as the vision that you would hold as a creator with a professional ensemble. It's within those boundaries that you need to work, and to sort of paraphrase Igor Stravinsky, great composer, restriction actually is one of the best features to enliven creativity. Writing for orchestra and choir, the project requires a text. We need to find something to set. I reached out to my colleague and longtime collaborator, Marguerite Bunce, an Australian poet now resident in France, and spoke to her about the project. And she chose the idea of peace, which is consistent with the artistic aims of what we're trying to do in cultural exchange. And we have this beautiful poem from Marguerite, Peace Be Upon You. And the four movements apportioned to us, the three composers and myself, and we took a movement each to set. It's a beautiful poem. It captures different aspects. The imagery and the text is one which speaks deeply to all of us. And I say that because talking to the composers, they embraced their part of the four-part poem, and has really spoken to them, and they've created their remarkable pieces as responses to the text, as I have. I hope in writing this music and setting the music for the ensemble, the orchestra and the choirs, children's choir, that we use music and the text as a way of speaking directly to our audiences in Malaysia and Australia. There is something very fundamentally human about the concerns of the current world, and peace is something that artists can speak to directly. Through our creativity, we want to communicate that aspect of the work, that response, that feeling that we want to convey to our audiences, that is so essential to this work. It is abstract, the idea of peace, but it is something that is emotional. And as artists, we can speak directly to the emotion of our audiences, regardless of their language, and perhaps even regardless of their cultural position or even political position. It is a shared human concern that we bring peace to the world, and that peace in the world exists. I'm hoping the experience of this with young composers and with young performers is one where they understand more deeply the need for new art to be created, that it is not just the role of ensembles to recreate past works, but to engage with contemporary composers and to actually understand what it means to create new work. And for a composer, the work isn't finished until the performance happens. What we present on a score is only a suggestion. It's a bit like the way an architect draws a plan. That is not the building. It is the collaboration with the builders and the architect that the actual building becomes reality. It's the same for composers. It's the collaboration between the ensemble, the conductor, and ourselves as musical visionaries to what we are anticipating it to happen, and then for the ensemble to actually make it happen. Then you have music. The score isn't the music. It's when you come together with the performers interpreting the score, then we have music. An added bonus for this project is to be programmed alongside a major work by Carl Jenkins. Very exciting. Always an opportunity to have your work heard in that context. It shouldn't be, and I don't think it ever came up, certainly in our discussions, as being anything other than a great opportunity. And when you have four, now five, if we include Carl Jenkins' work, you have five different artistic visions for the work. And that is the beauty of new art, that you have these different perspectives, that is not just uniform, it is not just a tried and true music of the canon that people are hearing. They're hearing new voices, and maybe it's confrontational, maybe it's different, maybe it's not something they're anticipating, but that's the beauty of new art, that you are being presented with a new vision of what could be when you collide the opportunity of new poetry, new music, and young performers coming together under the direction of Kevin and Nicole to create something entirely new and we think very special. My role with the composers mentor was more coach. I didn't have to discuss technical things. I didn't need to teach these very talented trio of composers anything technical about their writing, but really talking about ideas and how do you actually bring those ideas to fruition. The idea of setting a new work, how do you capture the spirit, how do you create something new from what was a complete work in the form of a poem to create an entirely new work when you actually make that the lyrics for the setting in a new musical work. We also talked about the challenges of working with a community group and how that presents a different outcome and what assumptions we would make as composers. When you come to write for a work, you can't make the same assumptions with an ensemble unless you understand that ensemble, and we discussed that. We also talked about exemplars, where different ideas, different approaches to setting a text, different approaches to working with groups such as a community group versus other ensembles. These are all the type of things that come into play that help composers and any artist set goals as to what the outcome is. There's always that very, very clear pressure that we need to deliver by a certain date. And we did. There was interaction, but as for me, my interaction was as a guide, as a coach. The composers had contact with each other, they consulted, they talked ideas, we shared ideas and consulted, and that became a very real reality in the final conception of the works, and which are all very distinct, I think. 3 distinct voices from these young composers.